The Blackwood Estate had been empty for 3 years, its towering gates rusted shut and windows boarded tight. For escaped POWs, Marcus Chen, Sarah Torres, and Jake Williams, it looked like salvation, a place to hide while they planned their next move across enemy territory. But as they slipped through the mansion's crumbling walls, they realized this wasn't just any abandoned house. This was tech mogul Vincent Blackwood's fortress, the man who'd vanished after his defense contracts were suddenly terminated. What they found in the basement changed everything. Behind a hidden steel door lay laboratories filled with grotesque experiments, human subjects suspended in tanks, classified documents stamped with government seals, and footage of military officials authorizing procedures that violated every international law. Marcus, a former intelligence officer, recognized faces in those videos. High-ranking generals, Pentagon officials, people who were supposed to be the good guys. The 3 fugitives weren't just hiding anymore, they were sitting on evidence that could topple governments. But who could they trust when the conspiracy reached the very people hunting them down? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus stared at the monitor, his hands trembling as he paused the video feed. General Morrison's face filled the screen, unmistakable even in the grainy security footage. The same man who had personally briefed Marcus's unit before their capture. The same man who had promised them extraction that never came. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered, peering over his shoulder. Her combat medic training had prepared her for battlefield horrors, but nothing like this. The tanks behind them hummed with a low mechanical breathing that made her skin crawl. Those are American soldiers in there. Jake limped closer, favoring his injured leg from their escape 3 days prior. The former demolitions expert had seen his share of classified operations, but this was beyond anything in his clearance level. "Look at the dates on these files," he said, rifling through a stack of documents. "Some of this goes back 15 years. They've been doing this since before the war even started." Marcus clicked through more video files, each one revealing another piece of the puzzle. Project Lazarus, neural enhancement protocols, genetic modification trials. The subjects in the tanks weren't just soldiers, they were test cases for creating super soldiers, enhanced reflexes, accelerated healing, increased aggression, everything that would give them an edge in combat. But the cost was horrifying. Most subjects died within months. Those who survived were barely human anymore, their minds fractured by the procedures, their bodies grotesquely altered. The success rate hovered around 3%. "They're building an army," Marcus realized, his voice barely audible. "Not just any army. An army that can't question orders because they've had their humanity stripped away." Sarah found medical files detailing the process. Neural pathways rewired to eliminate fear and empathy. Bone density increased by 40%. Muscle mass enhanced through illegal growth hormones. The subjects were turned into living weapons, programmed for absolute obedience. A sound from upstairs made them all freeze. Footsteps, heavy boots on marble floors. "Shit!" Jake hissed, grabbing a USB drive and shoving files into his jacket. "Someone's here." Marcus quickly copied video files while Sarah gathered medical documents. They had minutes, maybe less, before whoever was upstairs found the hidden entrance to the laboratory. The steel door they discovered was concealed behind a false wall in what appeared to be a wine cellar. If they were lucky, the intruders might miss it. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by voices. At least 3 men, possibly more. They were searching methodically, room by room. "There," Sarah pointed to a ventilation shaft in the corner. "We can get out through the mansion's air system." But as they prepared to leave, Marcus spotted something that made him stop cold. A final folder marked with yesterday's date. Fresh documents. This facility wasn't abandoned, it was still active. The papers revealed Phase 2 of Project Lazarus. The Pentagon had approved human trials on prisoners of war, specifically American POWs who had been reported as killed in action, but were actually being used as test subjects. The program was expanding with plans to process hundreds of captured soldiers. Marcus's blood ran cold as he read the selection criteria: intelligence officers with specialized training, combat medics with field experience, demolitions experts with technical knowledge. People exactly like them. "They're not hunting us to bring us back," he whispered to the others as they squeezed into the ventilation shaft. "They're hunting us to turn us into those things." The realization hit them all simultaneously. Their escape hadn't been a stroke of luck. It had been orchestrated. They were being herded toward this facility, meant to become the next subjects in Blackwood's twisted experiments. As they crawled through the darkness above the mansion, the voices below grew more urgent. Someone had found the laboratory. Their window of escape was closing fast, but now they carried something more dangerous than their own secrets. They carried proof of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government, evidence that could save countless lives, if they could survive long enough to expose it. The mansion's front door hung open like a gaping wound, its expensive mahogany frame splintered where someone had forced entry. Marcus Chen pressed his back against the stone pillar, signaling for Jake and Torres to hold position. 3 years in a North Korean labor camp had taught him to read danger in the smallest details, and everything about this place screamed wrong. "Could be other escapees," Torres whispered, his scarred hands gripping a piece of rebar they'd picked up from the estate's crumbling gate. "Maybe they cleared out already." Jake shook his head, rainwater dripping from his matted beard. "Look at the damage. This wasn't desperate refugees looking for shelter. This was professional." Marcus studied the scene through the ornate windows flanking the entrance. Furniture lay overturned in what had once been an opulent foyer, but the destruction seemed methodical rather than random. Paintings hung askew, their frames intact but clearly searched behind. Someone had been looking for something specific. "We should keep moving," Torres muttered. "Find another place to hole up." "No." Marcus stepped forward, his instincts overriding caution. "We need supplies, and this storm isn't letting up. Besides, whoever did this is long gone." They slipped inside, their waterlogged boots squelching against Italian marble. The mansion's interior spoke of wealth beyond imagination, or had, before someone had systematically torn it apart. Crystal chandeliers hung intact overhead, but every drawer had been pulled out, every cabinet searched. Jake moved toward what looked like a study, then froze. "Guys, you need to see this." The room beyond held the unmistakable signs of violence. A massive oak desk sat overturned, its leather top stained dark. Scattered papers covered the floor, many bearing official seals that made Marcus's stomach tighten. He knelt and picked up a document fragment bearing a Department of Defense letterhead. "Richard Blackwood," Torres read from a monogrammed letter opener. "Why does that name sound familiar?" "Because he testified before Congress last year," Marcus said quietly. "Defense contractor, specialized in biological research for the military. He studied the blood spatter pattern on the wall, and unless I'm wrong, he's very dead." A sound from somewhere deeper in the house made them all freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from below. Marcus held up 3 fingers, then pointed toward the sound's source. They moved as one unit, years of military training overriding the trauma of their imprisonment. The footsteps led them through a kitchen that had also been methodically searched, then down a corridor lined with family portraits. Marcus noted how each frame had been removed and replaced. Someone had checked behind every single one. At the hallway's end, they found something that shouldn't have existed: a service elevator, its brass doors polished to a mirror shine despite the mansion's violated state. The indicator showed it was currently 3 floors down. Impossible, given that they were standing at ground level. "Underground levels," Jake breathed. "In a private residence? That's military-grade construction." The elevator hummed as it began ascending. Marcus grabbed Torres and Jake, pulling them behind a marble statue just as the doors slid open with a soft chime. 2 men in black tactical gear emerged, their movements precise and coordinated. Neither spoke, but their hand signals were clear. They were conducting a sweep, looking for something or someone they hadn't found yet. Both carried weapons that Marcus didn't recognize, sleek designs that suggested cutting-edge military development. The men split up, one heading back toward the main house while the other moved toward the kitchen. Marcus waited until their footsteps faded, then approached the elevator. The control panel required a keycard, but Jake produced a bent paperclip from his pocket, old habits from their special forces days. "This is insane," Torres whispered as Jake worked on the lock. "We should get out of here." "And go where?" Marcus countered. "We're escaped POWs in the middle of nowhere. Whatever's down there, it's important enough to kill for. That makes it valuable." The elevator chimed softly as Jake's improvised lockpick found its mark. The doors slid open, revealing a pristine interior that looked like it belonged on a spacecraft rather than in a mansion. The button panel showed 5 sub-levels, each marked with cryptic designations: R&D, Biolab, Storage, Classified, and at the bottom, simply marked with a red triangle. "Research and development in someone's basement?" Jake muttered. What the hell was Blackwood really doing here? Marcus pressed the button for R&D, the top level. If they were going to investigate, they'd start small and work their way down. The elevator descended smoothly, but through the brushed steel walls they could hear something that made his blood run cold. The distant sound of machinery and what might have been screaming. The doors opened onto a corridor that belonged in a government facility, not a private residence. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on walls lined with observation windows. And behind those windows, in rooms that stretched beyond sight, were tanks filled with floating shapes that had once been human. The steel door groaned as Marcus forced it open, revealing a corridor that stretched into absolute darkness. The air that rushed out carried the sterile smell of chemicals and something else, something organic and unsettling that made Elena's stomach turn. "Jesus," Tommy whispered, covering his nose with his sleeve. "What is that smell?" Marcus found a light switch, and fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, casting harsh shadows down the concrete hallway. The bunker was larger than they'd imagined, with multiple branching corridors and heavy metal doors marked with biohazard symbols and alphanumeric codes. Elena stepped forward, her combat boots echoing against the polished floor. "This isn't just a bunker, this is a full research facility." She pointed to the ventilation systems and emergency protocols posted on the walls. "Look at the infrastructure. Someone spent serious money building this place." They moved deeper into the facility, passing laboratories filled with equipment that looked more advanced than anything Elena had seen during her military service. Computer terminals hummed quietly, their screens displaying scrolling data that meant nothing to her but suggested the facility was still operational. "Check this out," Tommy called from behind a glass partition. Through the reinforced window, they could see a room filled with cylindrical tanks, each one large enough to hold a human being. Green liquid bubbled inside several of them, and monitoring equipment beeped steadily nearby. Marcus tried the door handle. Locked. "What do you think they were growing in there?" Elena examined the warning labels plastered across the glass. "Project Lazarus, Cellular Regeneration Protocol." She read the smaller text aloud. "Authorized personnel only. Level 5 clearance required." She looked up at her companions. "Level 5 is above top secret. This is black budget stuff." A soft mechanical whir made them all freeze. Down the corridor, a security camera had rotated in their direction, its red recording light blinking steadily. Marcus reached for his stolen pistol, but Elena grabbed his wrist. "Don't. If this place is still monitored, shooting cameras will only confirm we're here. Maybe they'll think we're maintenance or something." They hurried past the camera, but Elena could feel its electronic eye tracking their movement. The facility seemed to stretch endlessly underground, with multiple levels accessed by a central elevator shaft. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow, making their shadows dance like specters on the walls. In what appeared to be the main laboratory, they discovered banks of computers still running complex simulations. Elena recognized some of the terminology from her intelligence training: genetic sequencing, neural mapping, behavioral modification. But the scope of the research was staggering. Tommy found a stack of printed reports on one of the workstations. His face went pale as he read. "Guys, listen to this. Subject 47 showed remarkable regenerative capabilities after exposure to compound X-7, complete limb regrowth achieved in 72 hours. Side effects include heightened aggression and temporary loss of higher cognitive function." "They were creating super soldiers," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Healing factor, enhanced strength, probably increased pain tolerance." He gestured around the lab. "All of this, it's military enhancement research." Elena's mind raced through the implications. Research this advanced, this expensive, it had to be government-funded. But there's no way Congress approved anything like this. Someone was running an unauthorized program. A new sound reached them from deeper in the facility, the distinct hum of an elevator in motion. Elena motioned for silence, and they crouched behind a lab bench, weapons drawn. The elevator chimed softly as it reached their level, and they heard footsteps approaching. "Maintenance team to level 3, a voice called out. "We've got unauthorized access alerts throughout the complex. Check all laboratories and report any signs of intrusion." Elena caught Marcus's eye and mouthed the word "trapped." They were 3 levels underground, with only one known exit, and now security was actively searching for them. The footsteps split up, with at least 2 people moving in different directions through the facility. Tommy spotted an emergency exit map on the wall and studied it frantically. He pointed toward a service tunnel marked as leading to the surface, but reaching it would mean crossing the main corridor where the security team was conducting their sweep. The footsteps were getting closer. Elena could hear radio chatter as the security team coordinated their search. Professional voices, calm and efficient, not the kind of guards who would simply escort trespassers to the nearest police station. These people were protecting something worth killing for. Marcus gathered several of the research files, stuffing them into his jacket. "If we're going to risk our necks getting out of here, we're taking proof of what we found." Elena nodded. They'd stumbled onto something massive, something that connected to power structures far above their understanding. But they were also 3 fugitives with nowhere to run and no one to trust. The only thing that might keep them alive was the evidence they could gather about what was really happening in this underground nightmare. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus led them deeper into the facility, their footsteps echoing off polished concrete walls. Each door they passed bore cryptic designations: Biomech 7, neural interface testing, cognitive enhancement protocols. Sarah's medical training made her stomach turn as she read between the lines of what these sterile labels likely concealed. "Jesus Christ," whispered Rodriguez, stopping before a reinforced glass window. Beyond it lay a laboratory filled with surgical tables, 4 stands, and monitoring equipment that belonged in a hospital, not a billionaire's basement. What kind of sick experiments were they running here? Marcus pulled them away from the window. "We need to keep moving, find evidence we can use, then get the hell out." But even as he spoke, his own curiosity was getting the better of him. 23 years of military service hadn't prepared him for anything like this. They reached an intersection where the main corridor branched into 3 directions. Emergency lighting cast red shadows that made everything look like a scene from hell. Sarah pointed left toward a sign reading administration. "If there's documentation, it'll be there." The administrative section felt different. Carpeted floors replaced concrete, and the walls were lined with what appeared to be normal office doors. But the first office they entered shattered any illusions of normalcy. Charts covered the walls showing human anatomical diagrams marked with injection sites and neural pathway mappings. A desk calendar showed appointments scheduled months into the future, as if whoever worked here had simply vanished mid-project. Rodriguez found a filing cabinet and yanked it open. Manila folders stuffed with documents spilled out, their contents a horrifying catalogue of human experimentation. Subject profiles with photos of military personnel, soldiers who looked barely old enough to shave. Progress reports detailing cognitive enhancement trials, pain threshold testing, and something called loyalty programming. "Marcus, you need to see this." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. She held a folder marked with a familiar military designation. "These aren't random test subjects, they're POWs. American POWs. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Prisoners of war being used as guinea pigs for experimental procedures, hidden away in a private facility where no oversight could reach them. His hands shook as he flipped through photographs of men and women in military uniforms, their faces bearing the hollow expressions of people pushed beyond their breaking point. Rodriguez had moved to a computer terminal and was frantically typing. "The system's still active. I'm downloading everything I can onto this flash drive, but there's terabytes of data here. Videos, medical records, correspondence." The screen flickered and his face went pale. "Oh shit, there's recent activity. Someone accessed this system 2 hours ago." The sound of a heavy door slamming somewhere in the facility made them all freeze. Then came the unmistakable echo of boots on concrete, moving with military precision. Multiple sets of feet, getting closer. "Back exit," Marcus hissed, grabbing the most damning files they'd found. "Now." They moved through the administrative area like ghosts, but the approaching footsteps were getting louder, more coordinated. Whoever was coming knew the facility's layout intimately. Sarah spotted an emergency exit sign and led them toward it, but when she pushed the door, an alarm shrieked through the corridors. "So much for stealth," Rodriguez muttered, shouldering the door open despite the screaming alarm. They emerged into a service tunnel that connected the bunker to what appeared to be a maintenance building on the estate grounds. Behind them, shouting voices echoed through the facility, and the beam of tactical flashlights began sweeping the corridors they'd just vacated. The tunnel stretched ahead for what seemed like 100 yards, lit only by the red glow of emergency lighting. Their pursuers had reached the administrative section. They could hear doors being kicked open and angry voices coordinating a search. Professional voices, military voices. "These aren't random security guards," Marcus whispered as they ran. "They're military contractors. Black Ops types." The maintenance building exit appeared ahead, but as they reached for the door handle, they heard the unmistakable sound of vehicles surrounding the building from outside. Engines, car doors slamming, radio chatter. They were trapped between the search team behind them and an unknown force waiting above. Sarah pressed her ear to the exit door. At least 3 vehicles, multiple personnel. They're not taking any chances. Rodriguez clutched the flash drive containing the downloaded files like a lifeline. "Whatever's on here, they're willing to kill to protect it. We've stumbled into something way bigger than illegal experiments." Marcus studied their surroundings, his tactical mind racing through options. The maintenance building had several levels, utility access points, and if he remembered correctly from their initial reconnaissance, it connected to the estate's extensive groundskeeping infrastructure. "We're not getting out the way we came in," he said quietly. "Time to get creative." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus led Elena and Dmitri deeper into the underground facility. The sterile corridors stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with reinforced steel doors bearing cryptic alphanumeric codes. Each step echoed, despite their attempts at stealth, the sound bouncing off polished concrete walls that felt more like a tomb than a research facility. "This place has been operational recently," Elena whispered, running her fingers along a pristine handrail. "No dust, no corrosion. Someone's been maintaining it." Dmitri paused at a door marked B-7 and peered through the reinforced glass window. Inside, rows of empty hospital beds stretched across the room, each equipped with restraints and monitoring equipment that looked decades ahead of anything he'd seen in military hospitals. 4 stands hung like skeletal sentinels beside each bed, their tubing coiled and waiting. "Medical wing," he reported quietly, "but not for healing." Marcus felt his stomach clench. He'd seen enough military hospitals during his tours to know the difference between treatment facilities and something far more sinister. The beds were spaced too far apart, the restraints too heavy-duty, and the monitoring equipment too sophisticated for standard medical care. They moved past several more doors, storage rooms filled with unmarked crates, laboratories with equipment they couldn't identify, and offices with filing cabinets that had been recently emptied, their drawers hanging open like accusatory mouths. The deeper they ventured, the more apparent it became that this wasn't just abandoned, it was evacuated, and recently. Elena stopped abruptly at a door marked Archive Level 1 and tried the handle. Locked, but the electronic keypad beside it was still active, its red light blinking steadily. She studied the worn numbers, noting which keys showed the most finger wear. 3, 7, 8, 1, she murmured, inputting the combination. The light turned green with a soft beep that made all three of them freeze. When no alarm sounded, Elena pushed the door open. The archive room beyond contained floor-to-ceiling servers, their blue LED indicators creating an ethereal glow in the darkness. The quiet hum of cooling fans and hard drives filled the space. Marcus realized this facility wasn't just maintained, it was still actively running. "Someone's been here within days," he said, noticing a half-empty coffee cup on a desk near the entrance. The liquid inside had grown a thin skin but hadn't completely evaporated. Dmitri approached the nearest server rack and found an active terminal. The screen displayed a login prompt over a government seal he didn't recognize. Not quite military, not quite civilian. Elena joined him and began typing, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "I can't crack the main system," she admitted after several attempts, "but there's a guest directory I can access." The screen populated with folder names that made Marcus's blood run cold: Project Blackwater, Neural Interface Trials, Battlefield Enhancement Protocols, Asset Recovery Operations. Elena clicked on Asset Recovery Operations, and a list of files appeared with dates spanning the past 18 months. The most recent entry was from 3 days ago. She opened it, and a report filled the screen detailing successful retrieval of escaped test subjects from the Volkov facility. "Test subjects," Dmitri repeated, his accent thickening with anger. "That's what they called us." Marcus read over Elena's shoulder as she scrolled through the document. References to enhanced interrogation through neural stimulation, memory modification trials, and battlefield trauma simulation painted a picture of systematic torture disguised as research. But it was the final paragraph that made his hands shake. The report noted that 3 subjects from the Volkov facility remained unrecovered, with orders to terminate with extreme prejudice to prevent compromise of ongoing operations. Their names were listed in clinical detail: Elena Vasquez, Marcus Chen, Dmitri Volkov. "They're not just hunting us," Elena said quietly. "They're planning to kill us." A distant sound echoed through the facility, the mechanical whir of an elevator in motion. All 3 froze, listening intently as the sound grew closer. Marcus grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her away from the terminal while Dmitri quickly closed the files they'd accessed. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, accompanied by radio chatter too muffled to understand clearly. But the tone was unmistakably operational, organized, professional, lethal. "Multiple exits?" Marcus whispered. Elena shook her head, pointing to a ventilation grate near the ceiling. It was their only option besides the door they'd entered through, and the footsteps were getting closer. Dmitri boosted Elena up to the grate, while Marcus grabbed the half-empty coffee cup and several sheets of paper from the desk, anything that might prove what they'd discovered. As Elena disappeared into the ventilation shaft, the radio chatter outside became clearer. "Sweep every room. They're here somewhere, and they've seen too much to walk away." The hunt had found them, and this time there would be no mercy. The metal stairs descended into absolute darkness, each step echoing like gunshots in the confined space. Marcus led the way, his hand trailing along the cold concrete wall, while Chen kept one palm pressed against his back, and Rodriguez brought up the rear, constantly glancing over her shoulder at the rectangle of pale light that marked their entry point. 23 steps down, Marcus's boot touched level ground. The air here was different. Sterile, recycled, with an undertone of something chemical that made his nostrils burn. Emergency lighting suddenly flickered to life, triggered by motion sensors, revealing a corridor that stretched beyond the reach of the dim red bulbs. "Jesus Christ," Chen whispered, his voice carrying further than it should have in the confined space. The walls were lined with reinforced steel plates, punctuated every few yards by heavy doors marked with biohazard symbols and alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to any of them. The floor was polished concrete, so clean it reflected the emergency lights like black water. Rodriguez moved past them, drawn to the nearest door by some invisible force. The small window was made of thick glass, and she had to cup her hands around her eyes to peer through. What she saw made her stumble backward. "We need to leave," she said, her voice cracking. "Right now." Marcus grabbed her shoulder. "What did you see?" "Bodies," she managed. "Tanks full of bodies." Chen pushed forward to look for himself, then immediately turned away, his face green in the red light. "Those aren't just bodies, they're connected to machines, tubes and wires going into them." Marcus forced himself to look. The room beyond contained a dozen cylindrical tanks filled with some kind of preservative fluid. Floating inside each one was a human figure, some in military fatigues, others in civilian clothes. Monitoring equipment lined the walls, screens still flickering with data streams and vital signs that should have been flatlined years ago. "Cryogenic preservation," Marcus said, his military training helping him process what civilian minds couldn't accept, but not for medical purposes. "Look at the neural interface cables." Rodriguez was already moving to the next door, compelled by the same horrible fascination that makes people slow down at car accidents. This room contained something worse, operating tables with restraint systems that had clearly been used recently. Surgical instruments lay arranged on sterile trays, and the walls were covered with charts showing human anatomy overlaid with mechanical schematics. "They were trying to create something," Chen said, reading the labels on the charts. "Enhanced reflexes, increased strength, pain tolerance modifications. This is straight out of a science fiction nightmare." The third door revealed banks of computer servers, their cooling fans creating a constant low hum that had been subliminal until now. But it was the fourth door that made Marcus's blood turn to ice water. Through the reinforced window, he could see 3 bodies laid out on examination tables. They wore the same prison-issue clothing that he, Chen, and Rodriguez had discarded hours earlier. The faces were wrong, too symmetrical, too perfect, but the builds were right. Same heights, same approximate weights. "They knew we were coming," he said quietly. Rodriguez looked over his shoulder and saw her own face staring back from one of the tables, or something that looked exactly like her face attached to a body that had never drawn breath. "That's impossible," Chen said, but his voice carried no conviction. "How could they know we'd escape? How could they know we'd end up here?" Marcus was already moving deeper into the corridor, pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking together in his mind. "Because we didn't escape, we were released. This whole thing, the convenient guard rotation, the unlocked door, even finding this place, it was all orchestrated." They reached a circular chamber that served as a hub for 6 different corridors. In the center sat a bank of monitors showing feeds from security cameras positioned throughout the bunker. And there, on the screens, they could see themselves from multiple angles, 3 figures huddled together in the red emergency lighting, looking exactly like the frightened, desperate escapees they were supposed to be. But it was the audio pickup that delivered the killing blow. A voice echoed through hidden speakers, calm, professional, utterly without warmth. "Test subjects have reached the central observation hub. Stress responses are within acceptable parameters. Neural mapping is complete. Initiate phase 2. Rodriguez spun in a circle, searching for the source of the voice. "Who's there? Show yourself." The voice continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Note that Subject 3 shows heightened aggressive responses. May require additional conditioning before integration." Chen grabbed Marcus's arm. "Integration into what?" Before Marcus could answer, the lights went out completely. In the absolute darkness that followed, they could hear something moving in the corridors around them. multiple somethings, approaching from different directions. The sounds weren't quite footsteps, they were too rhythmic, too mechanical, and underneath it all, barely audible, was the sound of breathing that wasn't coming from any of them. The steel door slammed shut behind them with a finality that made Sarah's stomach clench. The sound of boots echoed from somewhere in the maze of corridors they'd just escaped, but here in this new chamber, an oppressive silence settled over them like a burial shroud. Marcus fumbled along the wall until he found a light switch. Fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, revealing a room that made their previous discoveries look like children's toys. "Jesus Christ," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. The chamber stretched out before them, easily the size of an aircraft hangar. Along the walls, dozens of glass tanks stood in perfect rows, each one large enough to hold a human body. Most were empty, their surfaces clouded with condensation, but several still contained murky fluid that seemed to pulse with an unnatural phosphorescence. Sarah approached the nearest active tank, her reflection wavering in the curved glass. Inside, suspended in the glowing liquid, floated what had once been a person. The figure was completely hairless, its skin pale and translucent, revealing the network of veins beneath. Thick cables ran from various points on its body to monitoring equipment that hummed quietly in the background. "Are they alive?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted an answer. Marcus checked the readouts on the tank's control panel. According to this, yes, brain activity, heartbeat, cellular regeneration, all active. He paused, studying the data more closely. But these readings don't make sense. The cellular regeneration rate is off the charts. It's like they're aging in reverse. Tommy had moved to examine other tanks. "There are dates on these," he called out. "This one says the subject has been in there for 7 years. He moved to the next. This one, 12 years. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. "What kind of monster does this to people?" A new voice answered from behind them. "The kind that's trying to save humanity." They spun around to find Dr. Elena Vasquez standing in a doorway they hadn't noticed before. She was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and eyes that held an unsettling mixture of intelligence and madness. Her lab coat was pristine white, a stark contrast to their own filthy clothing. "Dr. Vasquez, I presume," Marcus said, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon he'd taken from the guard. "Please, don't." She raised her hands, but her posture was more resigned than frightened. "I'm not armed, and even if I were, it wouldn't matter. You've seen too much already. These are people," Sarah said, gesturing toward the tanks. "Human beings you're experimenting on." "Were people," Vasquez corrected. "Volunteers, actually, terminal patients who chose to participate rather than face certain death. We've given them something far more valuable than the few months they had left. You've turned them into lab rats," Tommy spat. Vasquez walked calmly to one of the tanks, placing her hand on its surface with something approaching tenderness. "We've given them immortality. The regenerative process you're witnessing here could revolutionize medicine. Cancer, aging, genetic disorders, all of it becomes irrelevant." "At what cost?" Marcus demanded. "They're not living, they're just existing. Every breakthrough requires sacrifice. The Manhattan Project, the polio vaccine, organ transplants, all of them seemed monstrous to their contemporary critics." She turned to face them, her eyes blazing with fervor. "But this project makes all of those pale in comparison. We're talking about the end of human suffering." Sarah noticed movement in her peripheral vision. In one of the tanks, the suspended figure's eyes had opened. They were completely white, like polished pearls, but they seemed to track her movement. She took an involuntary step backward. "They're aware," she breathed. "They know what's happening to them." For the first time, Vasquez's composure faltered slightly. "Consciousness during the process is an unfortunate side effect we're still working to eliminate, but their sacrifice will benefit billions." "Who authorized this?" Marcus asked. "This facility, these experiments. Someone with serious power had to sign off on this." Vasquez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to fund immortality research when they're facing their own mortality. Senators, generals, CEOs, they all want to live forever. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor behind them. Vasquez glanced toward the sound, then back at them with what might have been pity. "I'm afraid your journey ends here," she said. "The security team has orders to contain any security breaches by any means necessary." "We won't let you bury this," Sarah said, backing toward another exit she'd spotted on the far side of the chamber. "You don't have a choice," Vasquez replied. "This facility doesn't exist. These experiments never happened, and in a few minutes neither will you." The footsteps were getting closer. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm and nodded toward Tommy, who was already moving toward the far exit. As they ran between the rows of tanks, Sarah caught glimpses of the pale figures floating in their artificial wombs, their white eyes following the group's desperate flight toward an uncertain escape. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Marcus led them deeper into the bunker's bowels. Behind them, the sounds of systematic searching grew closer, boots on metal, voices coordinating through radio static, the occasional clang of equipment being moved. Sarah's breathing was labored, her wounded shoulder leaving a sporadic trail of crimson drops on the concrete floor. "There," Jake whispered, pointing to a maintenance shaft partially hidden behind a bank of servers. "We can access the ventilation system." Marcus pried open the grate with trembling fingers while Sarah kept watch. The metal screamed in protest, the sound echoing through the corridor like a banshee's wail. They all froze, waiting for the inevitable rush of footsteps, but the searching continued at its methodical pace several levels above. "They're being careful," Sarah murmured. "Professional, military, government clean-up crew," Marcus agreed grimly. "The kind that makes problems disappear permanently." Jake squeezed through the opening first, his lean frame disappearing into the darkness. Marcus helped boost Sarah up despite her protests about her shoulder, then hauled himself through just as voices echoed from the main corridor they'd abandoned. The ventilation shaft was a claustrophobic nightmare of sharp edges and stifling heat. They crawled in single file, following Jake's lead as he navigated by the faint airflow and distant glimpses of light filtering through grates. Sarah bit back gasps of pain each time her shoulder scraped against the metal walls. "Wait," Jake breathed from ahead. Through a grate, they could see into what appeared to be a communications room. Banks of monitors displayed satellite feeds, encrypted data streams, and what looked like real-time surveillance footage of military installations around the globe. But it was the conversation taking place below that made them all strain to listen. "Containment is essential. The prisoners saw too much." The voice was crisp, authoritative. "General Morrison wants them eliminated before they can reach any media outlets." A second voice, younger and uncertain. "Sir, these are American soldiers. Heroes, actually. Their escape from the Afghan facility was... Their heroism ended the moment they broke into this facility." The first voice turned ice cold. "Project Lazarus is classified beyond their pay grade, beyond anyone's pay grade except the Joint Chiefs and the President himself." Marcus felt his blood turn to slush. Lazarus. The name on the files they'd seen, the experiments with the bodies in the tubes. Whatever they'd stumbled into was bigger than corporate malfeasance or illegal weapons development. "The neural enhancement protocols are decades ahead of anything our enemies possess." The authoritative voice continued. "Imagine soldiers who feel no pain, who can operate for days without sleep, whose reflexes are enhanced beyond human limitations. Imagine the tactical advantage." "At what cost?" the younger voice asked. "The test subjects all failed. Yes, the early trials were crude, but we're close to a breakthrough. The billionaire's resources combined with our expertise, his facilities providing the perfect cover. Until now." Through the grate, they could see two figures hunched over communication equipment. The older man wore a general's uniform, his grey hair cropped short, and his face bearing the hard lines of someone accustomed to making terrible decisions. The younger figure was a colonel, his discomfort evident in every gesture. "Sir, what about Patterson's family? They think he died serving his country. They don't know he volunteered for experimental enhancement and they never will." The general's tone brooked no argument. The families receive their honors, their benefits, their closure. The country receives its enhanced soldiers. Everyone wins, except the volunteers who died screaming in those tubes. The general turned slowly, his gaze fixing on the colonel with predatory intensity. "Are you having second thoughts about this project, Colonel Williams? Because I can arrange for you to join the next round of testing if your commitment is wavering." The colonel straightened, fear replacing moral uncertainty. "No, sir. I understand the necessity." "Good. Now, status report on our escaped POWs." Williams consulted a tablet. Thermal imaging shows they're somewhere in the lower levels. The facility is sealed. They can't escape. Strike Team Alpha is conducting a systematic search. Time frame? 2 hours maximum. They're injured, exhausted, and unfamiliar with the layout. It's only a matter of time. The general nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. And the cover story?" "Training accident. 3 heroes killed in an explosion during a classified exercise. Closed casket funerals, full honors. Their sacrifice will be remembered." Jake felt sick. They were already dead in the official records, their deaths planned and packaged for public consumption. Even if they somehow escaped this bunker, they'd be fugitives from their own government, hunted by the very system they'd sworn to serve. The general moved toward the door. "I want confirmation of termination within the hour. Clean up the lab, destroy any remaining evidence, and prepare the facility for relocation. This location is compromised." As the footsteps faded, the 3 prisoners remained motionless in the cramped ventilation shaft, each grappling with the magnitude of what they'd overheard. They weren't just witnesses to illegal experiments, they were loose ends in a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command. And loose ends, as they'd just learned, had a very short life expectancy. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Marcus led them deeper into the bunker's lower levels. Behind them, the sound of boots echoed through the corridors. Their pursuers had breached the main entrance faster than expected. Sarah's breathing was labored. The tablet clutched against her chest like a lifeline while Jake brought up the rear, constantly checking over his shoulder. "There," Marcus whispered, pointing to a maintenance shaft barely visible in the crimson gloom. "We can access the old mining tunnels through there. This whole mountain is riddled with them from the 1940s. Jake grabbed Marcus's arm. "How the hell do you know about mining tunnels?" "Because I helped design the security layout for this place 8 years ago." Marcus's admission hit them like a physical blow. "I was Special Forces engineering before I got captured. Thornfield Industries contracted my unit for consultation." Sarah stopped dead in her tracks. You knew what this place was." "I knew there was a bunker. I didn't know about the experiments." Marcus's voice carried genuine anguish. "Jesus Christ, Sarah. You think I would have walked into this nightmare voluntarily? I thought it was just another rich man's doomsday shelter." The sound of approaching footsteps cut short any further accusations. Marcus yanked open the maintenance panel, revealing a narrow shaft that disappeared into darkness. He grabbed Sarah's shoulders. "Listen to me. The mining tunnels connect to an old railway depot about 3 miles northeast. If we get separated, that's our rendezvous point. If," Jake hissed, "when they find this shaft, and they will, someone needs to slow them down." Sarah grabbed his jacket. "Don't you dare play hero now. We stick together." "Look at the facts," Marcus said, his voice eerily calm. 3 of us in that tunnel means we move like a herd of elephants. They'll track us down in an hour, but if someone stays behind to create confusion, to make them think we went a different direction, then that someone dies." Jake finished. Marcus smiled grimly. "Not necessarily. I know this place better than they think I do." The footsteps were getting closer. Sarah could hear radio chatter now, multiple teams coordinating their search. She made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'll stay." "Like hell," both men said simultaneously. I'm the slowest. I'm slowing you down anyway. She thrust the tablet toward Jake. Get this to someone who can expose the truth. Those families deserve to know what happened to their sons and daughters. Sarah, I'm not debating this. Her voice carried a steel that reminded both men she'd survived 3 years in a POW camp. Besides, they want me alive. I'm the one who cracked their encryption. I'm valuable to them. Marcus was already shaking his head. You don't understand. Once they have what they need from you, valuable becomes expendable very quickly. The radio chatter was getting louder. Multiple voices, coordinated movement. Sarah estimated they had maybe 2 minutes before the search teams reached their corridor. Then we all go, Jake decided. Sarah's right about one thing. Those families deserve the truth. But Marcus is right too. If we're going to move fast enough, we need another option. Marcus studied the maintenance shaft, then looked back down the corridor they'd come from. His expression shifted as a new idea took hold. The ventilation system. If I can reach the main air handlers, I can flood the upper levels with the fire suppression gas. It's not lethal, but it'll buy us time and create chaos. How long? Sarah asked. 20 minutes. Maybe 30 if I can trigger the emergency lockdown protocols. Jake grabbed the tablet from Sarah and slung it into the shaft ahead of him. Then we better move fast. They squeezed into the maintenance tunnel one by one, with Marcus bringing up the rear. The shaft was cramped and pitch black, forcing them to navigate by touch alone. Sarah's knees scraped against rough concrete as she crawled forward, following the sound of Jake's movement ahead of her. Behind them, she heard Marcus stop. This connects to the main ventilation trunk, he whispered. Keep going straight for about 50 yards, then you'll hit a vertical drop. That's the old mining access. Marcus, Sarah started. 20 minutes, he repeated. I'll meet you at the railway depot. If I'm not there by dawn, don't wait. Before either of them could protest, they heard Marcus moving away through a side passage. The sound of his movement faded quickly, leaving Sarah and Jake alone in the suffocating darkness. Come on, Jake whispered. He's buying us time. Let's not waste it. As they crawled forward through the tunnel, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's real plan involved a lot more sacrifice than he'd admitted. Behind them, somewhere in the maze of the bunker, alarms began to sound. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Marcus led them through another maze of corridors. Their footsteps echoed, despite their attempts at stealth, the sound bouncing off sterile walls that seemed to close in with each turn. Behind them, the distant shouts of their pursuers grew louder. Left here, Elena whispered, consulting the facility map she'd memorized from the computer terminal. Her photographic memory had always been an asset in intelligence work, but now it might be their only chance of survival. They rounded the corner and froze. 20 feet ahead, 2 guards stood at an intersection, their assault rifles raised and ready. The men hadn't spotted them yet, but there was nowhere to hide in the narrow hallway. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, feeling the cold metal against his back. He caught Elena's eye and held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They moved as a unit, Marcus diving low while Elena came in high, using techniques burned into their muscle memory from countless training sessions years ago. The guards barely had time to react before they were down, unconscious but alive. Still got it, Elena breathed, checking the guards' weapons. Like riding a bicycle, Marcus replied, though his ribs screamed in protest from the tackle. Tommy emerged from behind them, his face pale but determined. How many more between us and the exit? Before anyone could answer, the lights went out completely. Emergency power had failed, plunging them into absolute darkness. In the distance, they heard the mechanical grinding of heavy doors sealing automatically, lockdown protocol engaging. Backup generators must be failing, Elena muttered, pulling out her phone's flashlight. The weak beam barely penetrated the oppressive blackness. Or someone's cutting power to trap us down here. They moved forward by feel and instinct, Elena's directions guiding them through turns that all felt identical in the dark. The air grew thicker, staler, as ventilation systems shut down one by one. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were descending deeper instead of heading toward the surface. A new sound reached them, the subtle hiss of gas being released into the ventilation system. "Move faster," Marcus ordered, but even as he spoke, he felt a strange lightheadedness beginning to cloud his thoughts. The gas was already taking effect. Elena stumbled, catching herself against the wall. "Sedative," she managed. Maybe worse." Tommy's legs gave out first. Marcus caught him under the arms, half dragging the younger man as they pressed forward. But the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, and his own coordination was rapidly deteriorating. There, Elena pointed with a shaking hand. Through her phone's dying light, they could see a heavy door marked with yellow warning stripes. Environmental control room, might have separate air supply. Marcus's vision blurred as he fumbled with the door handle. Locked, of course. Elena weakly handed him her improvised lockpicks, but his fingers felt thick and clumsy. Behind them, flashlight beams appeared. Their pursuers were closing in, apparently equipped with gas masks. The lock clicked open just as consciousness began to slip away. They tumbled through the doorway into a room filled with humming machinery. Marcus slammed the door shut and threw the manual bolt, buying them precious seconds. The environmental control room was indeed on a separate air system. Within moments, their heads began to clear as clean air cycled through their lungs. But the reprieve would be temporary. Their enemies would have access codes for every door in the facility. "Look at this," Tommy said, his voice still slurred but gaining strength. He was standing before a large schematic display showing the entire underground complex. "We've been going in circles. The real exit is 3 levels up." Elena studied the display with clearing eyes. "But there's something else. Look at these areas marked in red. They're not on any of the maps we saw before." The red sections showed a vast network of chambers extending far beyond what they'd already discovered. One area was labeled simply Genesis Protocol, Level 7. Another showed Prototype Storage, Authorized Personnel Only. "How deep does this place go?" Tommy whispered. Before anyone could answer, the sound of drilling began outside the door. Their pursuers weren't bothering with access codes. They were coming through the walls. Marcus grabbed a fire axe from the emergency cabinet. "Whatever's down here, someone's willing to kill to protect it. That means it's evidence worth dying for." Elena was already downloading data from the environmental control computers onto a flash drive she'd found in one of the guards' pockets. "The real question is whether we try to get this evidence to the surface or if we go deeper and find out what they're really hiding." The drilling grew louder, sparks beginning to show through the doorframe. In minutes, maybe less, their sanctuary would be breached. "Vote," Marcus said grimly. "Up toward the exit and hope we can outrun them, or down into whatever hell they've built beneath us." The sparks intensified, and they heard voices coordinating on the other side of the wall. The emergency lighting cast long shadows down the concrete corridor as Marcus led them deeper into the bunker's lower levels. Each step echoed ominously, their footfalls seeming to announce their presence to whatever horrors might lurk ahead. Behind them, the acrid smell of smoke grew stronger, evidence that their sabotage above was taking hold. "There," Elena whispered, pointing to a heavy steel door marked with biohazard symbols. "That's where they kept the most sensitive materials." Through the reinforced glass window, they could see rows of refrigerated storage units, each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to them but everything to whoever had orchestrated this nightmare. Marcus tried the handle, locked, naturally. "Stand back." Yuki produced another explosive charge from their dwindling supply. "This is our last one." The blast reverberated through the narrow space, leaving their ears ringing. When the smoke cleared, the door hung askew on twisted hinges. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Elena moved directly to a central computer terminal, her fingers flying over the keys. "The hard drives are still intact. I can copy everything, but it'll take time." "How much time?" Marcus checked his watch. 23 minutes until their extraction window opened. 15 minutes, maybe 20 if the encryption is more sophisticated than I think. A distant rumble shook dust from the ceiling. Through the ventilation system, they could hear the crackle of flames and the groaning of stressed metal above them. Their sabotage was working, perhaps too well. "We might not have that long," Yuki observed, studying the ceiling with concern. "This whole place could come down." Marcus moved to the storage units, reading labels. Project Lazarus, Operation Silent Storm, Crimson Harvest. Each name more ominous than the last. One unit caught his attention. It was still powered, its digital display showing a constant temperature of -40 degrees Celsius. "Elena, what's Crimson Harvest?" She didn't look up from her typing. "Biological weapon, hemorrhagic fever virus, weaponized for aerosol deployment. 3 drops could contaminate a city's water supply." The casual way she delivered this information chilled Marcus more than the room's temperature. "How do you know that?" "Because I helped design it." The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Yuki's hand moved instinctively to her weapon, but Marcus held up a restraining hand. "Explain, now." Elena's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. 5 years ago, I was recruited for what I thought was defensive research, developing countermeasures to biological threats. It wasn't until later that I realized we were creating the threats themselves. "That's why you really ran," Marcus said, pieces falling into place. "Not just because you discovered the conspiracy, because you helped build it." "I tried to destroy my work when I understood what it really was. That's when they branded me a traitor." Her voice carried years of guilt and regret. "Every day since, I've tried to find a way to expose what they're doing, to make amends." Another rumble, stronger this time. Somewhere above them, a section of the facility collapsed with a thunderous crash. The lights flickered. "We need to move," Yuki urged. "Now." "Almost done." Elena's download progress bar crept toward completion. 80%. 90. The building shuddered violently, and the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in seconds later, bathing them in hellish red light. "That's it. We're leaving." Marcus reached for Elena's arm, but she pulled away. 30 seconds. The computer screen flickered. The download stalled at 96%. "Come on, come on," Elena muttered, frantically typing reset commands. A new sound reached them through the concrete and steel. Helicopters, multiple aircraft, approaching fast. "They found us," Yuki said. "Military choppers by the sound of it." The download resumed. 97%. 98. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him later. He grabbed one of the smaller storage containers, a sealed case marked with Crimson Harvest, and slipped it into his pack. If Elena's data was corrupted or incomplete, they needed physical evidence. "Got it." Elena ejected the drive just as the facility's main power grid failed completely. The storage unit's cooling systems wound down with mechanical death rattles. They ran through darkened corridors, guided only by emergency lighting and the growing orange glow of fires above. The helicopter sounds were deafening now, accompanied by the distinctive whine of rappelling equipment. Behind them, the lower levels began flooding with smoke as the facility's ventilation system pulled the inferno downward. Soon the entire bunker would be an oven. They reached the service tunnel they'd mapped earlier, a maintenance shaft that led to the estate's old wine cellar. Marcus boosted Elena up first, then Yuki. As he pulled himself into the narrow space, he heard boots pounding down the corridors behind them. Their pursuers had finally breached the lower levels. The tunnel was barely wide enough for their shoulders, forcing them to crawl through decades of accumulated dust and spiderwebs. But it led to freedom, to the truth, and to a reckoning that would shake the foundations of power, if they could survive the next 10 minutes. The screech of metal against concrete echoed through the bunker as Marcus hauled the emergency blast door shut behind them. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, blood seeping through his torn shirt. Elena pressed herself against the wall, chest heaving, while Jake worked frantically at a computer terminal, they'd discovered in what appeared to be a secondary control room. "How long before they cut through?" Elena whispered, eyeing the reinforced door that now stood between them and the tactical team hunting them through the underground maze. "Hour. Maybe 2 if we're lucky," Marcus replied, checking his makeshift bandage. "These doors were built to withstand a nuclear blast, but they've got cutting equipment up there that could slice through a tank." Jake's fingers flew across the keyboard, his face illuminated by the pale glow of multiple monitors. "I'm downloading everything I can find. Financial records, correspondence, experimental data. This is bigger than we thought. Way bigger." The screens flickered with damning evidence. Elena moved closer, reading over Jake's shoulder as files cascaded past. Project Lazarus wasn't just about creating super soldiers. It was a systematic program to test biological weapons on prisoners of war, political dissidents, and anyone else the government deemed expendable. The experiments had been running for decades, funded through a network of shell companies and black budget operations. "Look at these names," Elena breathed, pointing to a communication thread. "Senator Whitfield, General Morrison, CIA Director Hayes. They're all in on it." Marcus joined them at the terminal, his face grim. "And here I thought we were just dealing with some rogue military contractor. This conspiracy goes straight to the Pentagon and beyond." Jake pulled up a video file labeled Test Subject 247, Final Phase. The grainy footage showed a man strapped to a gurney, convulsing as scientists in hazmat suits injected him with an unknown substance. The subject's screams were muted, but his agony was unmistakable. After several minutes, he went still. One of the scientists checked his pulse and shook his head. "Failed termination," a clinical voice narrated. "Subject expired before achieving desired enhancement parameters. Recommend adjusting serum concentration for next trial." Elena turned away, sickened. "How many people died down here?" "According to these logs, over 3,000 test subjects since 1987, Jake said quietly. "Men, women, some barely out of their teens." The sound of power tools suddenly filled the air, accompanied by the distinctive blue-white glow of a plasma cutter seeping under the blast door. Their pursuers had arrived. "Time's up," Marcus said, shouldering a rifle he'd taken from one of the dead guards. "We need another way out." Jake ejected a data drive from the terminal and pocketed it. "I've got enough evidence here to bring down half the government, but only if we live long enough to expose it." Elena studied a schematic on one of the monitors, a detailed layout of the bunker complex. "There," she said, pointing to a section marked Emergency Evacuation Tunnel. "It connects to the old mining shafts that run under this whole mountain. If we can reach it, we might be able to surface somewhere outside their perimeter." "Might" being the operative word, Marcus muttered, but he was already moving toward a maintenance hatch in the corner of the room. As the plasma cutter continued its relentless work, carving through inches of reinforced steel, the 3 fugitives squeezed through the narrow access tunnel. The space was barely wide enough for a single person, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through decades of dust and debris. Behind them, voices echoed as the tactical team finally breached the control room. "They're gone. Check every access point. They can't have gotten far." The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, lit only by Jake's phone flashlight. Elena's breathing was labored in the confined space, but she pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that they carried the only evidence of crimes that demanded justice. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they emerged into a larger chamber carved from natural rock. Ancient mining equipment lay scattered about, rusted remnants of the mountain's industrial past. Fresh air circulated from somewhere above, carrying the scent of pine trees and freedom. "The evacuation tunnel should connect here," Elena said, consulting the schematic she'd photographed on her phone. They found it behind a false wall, a shaft that angled upward into the mountain's interior. Emergency lighting still functioned, casting an eerie red glow on the metal ladder rungs bolted to the rock face. Marcus tested the first few rungs. They held his weight, though decades of moisture had corroded the metal. It's a long climb, but it beats the alternative. As they began their ascent, the echo of pursuit grew fainter below. For the first time since discovering the bunker, Elena allowed herself to hope they might actually escape with their lives, and with evidence that could expose a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of power. But she also knew their real fight was just beginning. The silence stretched between Marcus and Elena like a taut wire ready to snap. Outside the communications room, Victor's footsteps echoed down the corridor as he continued his patrol, unaware of the bombshell that had just detonated in their small sanctuary. "You're lying," Marcus whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. The pieces were already falling into place. Elena's inexplicable knowledge of the compound's layout, her calm demeanor in situations that should have terrified a civilian, the way she handled weapons like someone with extensive training. Elena's shoulders sagged slightly, the mask she'd worn for days finally slipping. "I wish I were." She turned to face him fully, her eyes no longer holding the frightened helplessness he'd grown accustomed to. Instead, they burned with a cold intelligence that made his skin crawl. "My real name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I was the lead researcher on Project Lazarus until 18 months ago." 18 months. Marcus felt sick. "That's when you disappeared. When they said you were killed in that lab explosion in Nevada." The explosion was real, but it wasn't an accident. Elena moved to the window, staring out at the compound's dark corridors. "I discovered what they were really doing with my research. The regenerative properties weren't just for healing soldiers, they were creating something else. Something that could survive in environments that would kill normal humans. Biological weapons disguised as super soldiers." Marcus gripped his rifle tighter. "And you decided to play dead instead of exposing them?" "I tried to expose them. I went through proper channels, filed reports, contacted oversight committees." Her laugh was bitter. "You know what happened? My security clearance was revoked, my research was classified beyond my access level, and suddenly I was reassigned to a project that conveniently blew up 3 days later." The radio crackled behind them, and both froze. A voice emerged from the static, calm, authoritative, and entirely too close for comfort. "Dr. Vasquez, I know you're listening." Elena's face went white. She lunged for the radio, but Marcus caught her wrist. "Who is that?" he demanded. "General Morrison," she breathed. "He's the one who ordered my death." The voice continued, emanating from speakers throughout the compound now. Morrison had somehow accessed the entire communication system. "You've caused quite a stir, Doctor. 3 POWs stumbling into our little research facility was unexpected, but your presence here? That's what we call a complication." Victor's voice crackled over their portable radio. "Marcus, what the hell is going on? Who's talking?" Before Marcus could respond, Morrison's voice filled the room again. "Sergeant Chen, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Corporal Petrov, yes, we know exactly who you are. Your families believe you died heroically in combat. It would be unfortunate if that fiction became reality." Marcus felt ice in his veins. "They know our families." "The facility is now in complete lockdown," Morrison continued. "All exits are sealed. In 60 minutes, the ventilation system will be flooded with a classified nerve agent that was used in some of Dr. Vasquez's more successful experiments. You'll have that long to bring me the good doctor and any evidence you might have collected." Elena was frantically typing at the computer terminal. "I can override some of the lockdown protocols, but not the ventilation system. That's hardwired to prevent exactly what I'm trying to do." Victor's voice crackled again, tense with urgency. "Marcus, there are armed personnel moving through the upper levels. A lot of them." Marcus made a decision that went against every instinct screaming in his head. "Elena, can you get us out of here?" "Maybe, but we need to reach the primary server room. Everything, all the research, all the evidence of what they've done, it's all stored there. If we can download it and get it to the outside world, the 3 of us against a platoon of soldiers and a 60-minute countdown?" Marcus shook his head. "That's suicide." "Maybe, but it's the only way to stop them." Elena's voice carried a desperation that cut through his skepticism. "Marcus, they're planning to deploy this technology. The test subjects in those tanks?" They're prototypes for an army of enhanced soldiers who will follow orders without question, survive in any environment, and feel no pain or remorse. They want to replace human soldiers entirely. The weight of her words settled on him like a physical burden. Through the radio he could hear Victor moving quickly, the sound of doors opening and closing as he searched for better defensive positions. "How do I know you're not leading us into a trap?" Marcus asked. Elena pulled something from her pocket, a small device he hadn't seen before. "Because I've been recording everything since the moment I found you three. Every conversation, every piece of evidence, every room we've entered. If I don't upload this in the next hour, Morrison wins and this technology gets deployed." She looked him directly in the eyes. "Your choice, Marcus. Trust me, and maybe save the world. Or stay here and definitely die when that nerve gas hits." The countdown had begun. The elevator descended into darkness, emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red. Marcus gripped his stolen rifle tighter as the floors counted down. B3, B4, B5. Each level took them deeper into General Harrison's buried empire of horrors. "Movement sensors are picking up multiple contacts," Elena whispered, her fingers dancing across the tablet she'd liberated from the security station. "Looks like they've got people stationed at every sub-level." Tommy checked his weapons magazine for the third time. "How many we talking about?" "Too many." Elena's face was grim in the red glow. "But most of them are concentrated around B7 and B8. Whatever they're protecting down there, it's important enough to kill for." The elevator shuddered to a halt at B6. Through the reinforced glass, Marcus could see a corridor lined with heavy steel doors, each marked with biohazard symbols and numeric codes. The air itself seemed thick with menace. "We go quiet from here," Marcus said, checking his sidearm. "One shot fired and this whole place comes down on us." They slipped into the corridor, boots silent on polished concrete. The first door stood ajar, revealing a laboratory filled with monitoring equipment and glass tanks containing floating specimens that Marcus didn't want to identify. Charts on the walls showed human silhouettes marked with injection sites and cellular degradation patterns. "Jesus," Tommy breathed. "They're not just experimenting on soldiers, they're creating them." Elena had moved to a computer terminal, her fingers flying over the keys. "I'm downloading everything I can, but we need more time. The real data is stored on isolated systems deeper down." A soft chime echoed through the corridor, the elevator responding to a call from above. Marcus felt ice water flood his veins as he realized their window was closing. "Company's coming," he hissed. "How long do you need?" 5 minutes, minimum. Elena's hands never stopped moving. "There's something here about Project Lazarus. They're not just enhancing soldiers, they're bringing dead ones back." The elevator machinery groaned as it climbed toward the upper levels. Marcus calculated distances and angles, trying to figure out how many men Harrison could have sent down after them. The answer was probably more than they could handle. "We split up," he decided. "Tommy, find another way down to B7. Elena, keep working but be ready to move fast. I'll buy us time." "Like hell you will." Tommy grabbed his arm. "We stick together. That's how we survive the camps. That's how we survive this." "The camps didn't have private armies hunting us through underground bunkers," Marcus shot back. "We need that data, and we need someone to make it to the outside world. Do the math." Before Tommy could argue further, the elevator began its descent again. Marcus could hear boots on metal, voices coordinating in military precision. These weren't rent-a-cops or even regular soldiers. These were professionals. He moved to the corridor junction, using a mirror salvaged from one of the labs to check the angles. 6 men in full tactical gear, moving with the fluid coordination of a team that had worked together for years. They carried weapons Marcus recognized from his Special Forces days, expensive, quiet, and very deadly. Thermal imaging shows 3 targets in the B6 laboratory sector, one of them reported through his radio. Orders are to contain and eliminate. Marcus felt the familiar calm that came before violence. He'd been here before, outnumbered and outgunned, with everything depending on the next few seconds. The difference was that this time, he wasn't fighting for generals who saw him as expendable, he was fighting to expose them. The lead soldier rounded the corner, rifle raised and ready. Marcus took him with a knife thrust to the throat, catching the body before it could hit the ground and alert the others. He stripped the man's radio and earpiece, listening to the tactical chatter that would give him precious seconds of advantage. Alpha 1, report status. Marcus keyed the radio, deepening his voice and hoping the comm quality would mask any differences. Corridor secure, moving to sweep the eastern laboratories. Copy that. Bravo team is coming down the maintenance shaft. Watch for crossfire. Now Marcus knew there were at least 2 teams, with a third route of approach he hadn't accounted for. The net was tightening, but Elena was still working, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards as she pulled years of classified data from the military's most protected servers. Got it, she whispered. Project Lazarus, bioweapon development, human experimentation records going back 15 years. But Marcus, there's something else, something about you 3 specifically. What do you mean? Your escape wasn't random luck. Someone helped you, someone with high-level access who wanted you to find this place. Elena's face had gone pale. We're not witnesses to a conspiracy, we're part of it. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Every step of their journey had been guided, manipulated, orchestrated by someone playing a game whose rules they didn't understand. But there was no time to process the betrayal. Footsteps echoed from multiple directions now, closing in like the jaws of a trap. The helicopter's rotors cut through the pre-dawn air like mechanical death, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus pressed his back against the cold concrete wall of the drainage tunnel, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. Beside him, Elena clutched the waterproof case containing the evidence that could topple governments, while Tommy kept watch at the tunnel entrance, his stolen rifle trained on the tree line above. "They're doing a grid search," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible over the thunderous noise overhead. 3 birds, maybe 4. They're not playing around this time. Marcus checked his watch. 4:47 a.m. They had exactly 13 minutes before their extraction window opened at the old railway bridge, assuming Sarah had managed to coordinate with the journalist as planned. The margin for error had shrunk to nothing. Elena's face was pale in the dim light filtering through the storm grate above them. "The files in this case," she said, her voice steady despite everything, "they detail experiments going back 15 years, human trials, genetic modification, psychological conditioning, all funded through black budget allocations that don't officially exist. And General Morrison was the architect," Marcus replied grimly. "The man who's supposed to be running national security has been running his own private science fiction nightmare." The helicopter noise began to fade as the search pattern moved east. Tommy motioned for them to move, and they crept deeper into the tunnel system that ran beneath the estate. The darkness was absolute here, broken only by the pale glow of their salvaged phone's flashlight. Behind them, somewhere in the labyrinth they'd just escaped, lay the bodies of 6 operatives who'd tried to stop them. Marcus felt no satisfaction in their deaths, only the grim knowledge that each kill brought them closer to a point of no return. They weren't just escaped POWs anymore, they were enemy combatants on their own soil. "Movement ahead," Elena hissed, freezing in place. Marcus killed the light instantly. In the perfect darkness they could hear it, the splash of boots moving through standing water, coming from the direction of their intended exit. Someone had anticipated their route. Tommy's hand found Marcus's shoulder, then guided him to a side passage they'd almost missed. The 3 of them squeezed into the narrow space just as flashlight beams began sweeping the main tunnel. Voices echoed off the concrete walls, distorted but unmistakably professional. "Team 3 has the eastern outlets covered. No sign of the targets yet. Copy that. Command wants them alive if possible, but priority is securing the package. Do not let them reach the extraction point." Marcus felt Elena tense beside him. The extraction point was compromised. Sarah had either been captured or killed, or worse, she'd been turned. The possibility hit him like a physical blow. After everything they'd been through, the idea that their lifeline had been severed was almost too much to process. But Tommy was already moving, leading them deeper into the side passage. The man had an uncanny ability to navigate in absolute darkness, a skill honed during their captivity when sensory deprivation had been just another tool of psychological warfare. The passage opened into what felt like a larger chamber. Marcus risked a brief flash of light and saw they were in some kind of utility room, filled with rusted pipes and electrical panels that looked decades old. More importantly, there was another way out, a maintenance ladder leading up to what appeared to be a street-level access hatch. Elena was already studying a map she'd pulled from the case, cross-referencing it with her memory of the area above ground. If we can get to the old industrial district, there's a radio tower about 2 miles north. I might be able to reach some contacts in military intelligence who aren't part of Morrison's network. Might isn't good enough, Marcus said. We need certainty. Then we make our own certainty, Tommy replied, checking his ammunition. We've gotten this far by adapting. We don't stop now. The sound of their pursuers was growing more distant, but Marcus knew it was temporary. Morrison's people would expand their search grid systematically, covering every possible escape route with military precision. The general hadn't survived 30 years in intelligence by underestimating his enemies. Marcus thought about the files they'd uncovered, the scope of the conspiracy they'd stumbled into. 3 escaped prisoners against a network that reached into the highest levels of government. The odds were impossible, but impossibility had become their natural habitat over the past 48 hours. Elena sealed the case and slung it across her shoulder. Whatever happens next, we make sure this gets out. Every experiment, every victim, every dollar of taxpayer money they funneled into that nightmare, it all comes to light. Tommy was already climbing the ladder, testing the hatch above. It moved slightly, unlocked but heavy. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They emerged into an alley behind a row of abandoned warehouses as the first pale light of dawn began to creep across the horizon. Somewhere behind them, the helicopter search was intensifying. Ahead lay 2 miles of hostile territory and a desperate gamble on Elena's contacts. Marcus looked at his companions, battered, exhausted, but unbroken. They'd come too far to surrender now. The extraction point lay 3 miles ahead through dense woodland, but Marcus could already hear the distant thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the pre-dawn air. He pressed his back against a massive oak tree, signaling for Chen and Rodriguez to take cover behind the fallen log, 20 yards to his left. "That's not our ride," Chen whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind rustling through the canopy above. Marcus checked his watch. 0547 hours. Their contact wasn't due for another hour, and the approaching aircraft sounded like military hardware. Heavy, aggressive, nothing like the civilian helicopter Senator Walsh had promised to send. Rodriguez crawled closer, the hard drive containing Dr. Voss's research files still clutched protectively against his chest. How the hell did they find her so fast? The answer came in the form of muzzle flashes erupting from the tree line 50 meters ahead. Automatic weapons fire chewed through bark and leaves, forcing all 3 men to dive for deeper cover. Marcus rolled behind a cluster of boulders, his mind racing. They'd been careful, covered their tracks, avoided all main roads and populated areas during their night-long trek from Blackwood's estate. "Movement, 2 o'clock!" Chen called out, shouldering the rifle they'd taken from the bunker. He squeezed off 3 precise shots toward a figure darting between trees. The helicopter was closer now, its searchlight stabbing through the forest canopy like a mechanical eye. Marcus caught glimpses of tactical gear and night vision goggles as more soldiers moved through the underbrush. This wasn't a simple cleanup crew. This was a full military operation designed to eliminate any trace of what they'd discovered. "We need to move," Marcus shouted over the growing din. "They're trying to box us in." A grenade exploded 30 feet away, showering them with dirt and splintered wood. The concussion left Marcus's ears ringing, but it also revealed something crucial. The attackers were trying to drive them south. away from the extraction point and toward what looked like a natural clearing ahead. It's a kill box, he realized aloud. They want us in that clearing where the chopper can finish us. Rodriguez was already moving, staying low as he bounded from tree to tree. Then we go north. But as soon as he changed direction, more gunfire erupted from that flank. Chen swore colorfully in Mandarin as bullets sparked off the rocks near his position. They were completely surrounded, caught in a carefully orchestrated trap that had been waiting for them. The helicopter's searchlight swept across their position, and Marcus caught a clear view of the aircraft's markings, or rather, the complete absence of any identifying features. Black paint, no numbers, no insignia. Ghost Squadron hardware, the kind that didn't officially exist. Contact north. Chen fired rapidly at shapes moving through the shadows. At least 6 hostiles. Marcus's mind raced through their dwindling options. They were outgunned, surrounded, and running low on ammunition. The hard drive Rodriguez carried contained enough evidence to expose the entire conspiracy, but it wouldn't matter if they were all dead in the next 5 minutes. Then he remembered something from their reconnaissance of the bunker's layout. Dr. Voss had mentioned underground drainage systems that connected to the old mining tunnels beneath this entire region. If the maps were accurate, there should be an access point somewhere in this area. Rodriguez, the geological surveys from Voss's files, where's the nearest tunnel entrance? Rodriguez pressed himself against a tree trunk as bark exploded inches from his head. Northwest quarter-mile, maybe less, but we'll never make it through this crossfire. Another grenade detonated, closer this time. The helicopter was descending, its rotors whipping the forest into a frenzy of flying debris. Through the chaos, Marcus spotted rappelling lines dropping from the aircraft, fresh reinforcements preparing to fast rope into the clearing. Chen, lay down suppressing fire on my mark. Marcus pulled the last 2 smoke grenades from his belt. Rodriguez, you follow me. We're making a run for those tunnels. The searchlight swept toward them again, and Marcus yanked the pins from both grenades simultaneously. Grey smoke began billowing through the trees, providing precious seconds of concealment. Now! Chen's rifle cracked repeatedly as he sent controlled bursts toward every muzzle flash he could identify. Marcus and Rodriguez sprinted through the smoke, branches tearing at their clothes as they crashed through the underbrush. Behind them, shouts in English coordinated the assault team's movements. The tunnel entrance materialized out of the smoke-shrouded darkness, a concrete culvert half hidden by decades of overgrowth. Marcus dove through first, Rodriguez tumbling in behind him just as automatic weapons fire shredded the vegetation where they'd been standing. From somewhere in the chaos behind them, Chen's voice carried through the night. Go! I'll hold them as long as I can. The last thing Marcus heard before plunging into the underground darkness was the distinctive sound of Chen's rifle continuing to bark defiance at their pursuers, each shot buying them precious seconds to escape with the truth. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Marcus pressed his back against the concrete wall of the bunker's emergency exit. Sarah crouched beside him, the stolen hard drive clutched in her bloodied hands, while Chen kept watch through the narrow window slit. The estate grounds crawled with mercenaries, at least 24 armed figures moving in coordinated patterns through the moonlit darkness. They've got us surrounded, Chen whispered, his voice barely audible over the mechanical whine above. Professional military formation. These aren't regular security guards. Marcus peered around the corner, counting muzzle flashes in the distance. The mercenaries were systematically clearing the mansion, working their way toward the bunker entrance they'd used earlier. In minutes, maybe less, they'd discover the hidden exit. General Morrison doesn't mess around, Sarah muttered, checking the data device's integrity one more time. The files they'd downloaded contained everything: chemical weapons tests on unwilling subjects, genetic manipulation experiments, assassination orders bearing the signatures of high-ranking officials. Enough evidence to topple governments. The radio crackled from Chen's equipment pack. Alpha Team, report. Have you located the intruders? Negative, sir. Still sweeping the main structure. No sign of forced entry into the laboratory levels. Marcus grabbed the radio from Chen. They don't know about the service tunnels yet. How many rounds do we have left? Chen performed a quick inventory. 12 shots between us. Maybe 13 if that last magazine isn't damaged. The futility of their situation pressed down like a weight. 3 escaped prisoners against a private army, trapped in an underground maze with nowhere to run. But the evidence in Sarah's hands represented their only chance at vindication, proof that their original imprisonment had been orchestrated to silence them after they'd stumbled onto Operation Blackwater during their deployment overseas. "There has to be another way out," Sarah said, studying the bunker schematics they'd memorized. "Rich, paranoid bastards always build multiple escape routes." Marcus closed his eyes, recalling the layout. The water treatment facility. Remember the pipes running east? They connect to the municipal system about half a mile beyond the estate boundaries. Through the septic processing channels? Chen's face contorted in disgust. "Those pipes are barely wide enough for—" Automatic gunfire erupted from the corridor behind them. Shouts echoed through the concrete passages as the mercenaries breached the bunker's primary entrance. Heavy boots pounded against metal grating, growing closer. "Move," Marcus hissed. They sprinted through the utility corridor, emergency lighting casting frantic shadows on the walls. The bunker's layout became a blur of intersecting passages and service access points. Behind them, tactical commands bounced off the concrete as their pursuers gained ground. "Contact at Junction 7. 3 subjects moving toward mechanical systems." The water treatment chamber reeked of industrial chemicals and decay. Massive filtration tanks dominated the space, their surfaces slick with condensation. Sarah located the outflow pipe, a circular opening barely 3 feet in diameter, disappearing into absolute darkness. "You've got to be kidding," she breathed. Chen was already removing his equipment harness. Better than a body bag. Marcus went first, squeezing through the opening with the hard drive secured in a waterproof pouch. The pipe's interior was a nightmare of rust and organic buildup, but he forced himself forward, inch by agonizing inch. Behind him, Sarah's labored breathing echoed in the confined space. The sound of the mercenaries discovering their escape route carried through the pipe like a death knell. Angry voices, then the distinctive ping of bullets striking metal. "They're flooding the system," Chen shouted from the rear. "I can hear the pumps starting." Water began rushing around their bodies, carrying with it the stench of waste processing and chemical runoff. Marcus fought against panic as the liquid level rose, forcing them to keep their faces pressed against the pipe's upper curve. The current threatened to sweep them backward into the hands of their pursuers. Minutes stretched into an eternity of claustrophobic terror. Marcus's lungs burned as he navigated blind turns in complete darkness, following the pipe's natural slope toward freedom. The hard drive's weight seemed enormous in the cramped confines. Finally, mercifully, pale moonlight appeared ahead. The pipe's outlet emerged from a concrete culvert beside a county maintenance road hidden among overgrown vegetation. Marcus tumbled onto solid ground, gasping and retching. Sarah and Chen followed moments later, all 3 of them soaked and filthy but alive. In the distance, helicopter searchlights swept the estate grounds. Radio chatter indicated the mercenaries were expanding their perimeter, but they'd lost the trail. Sarah held up the waterproof pouch, checking its seal. Still intact. Marcus pulled out a burner phone they'd taken from the bunker's security office. "Time to make some calls. Every major news outlet simultaneously. Upload everything at once so they can't suppress it." Chen nodded toward the approaching dawn. "By tomorrow morning, General Morrison and his conspirators are going to have much bigger problems than 3 escaped prisoners." The truth was finally going to see daylight. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Marcus pressed his back against the concrete wall, Sarah and Tommy flanking him on either side. The copied hard drives felt heavy in his tactical vest. 18 months of classified data that could topple governments and expose decades of illegal human experimentation. Movement on the east perimeter. Sarah whispered into her radio, watching the thermal scope Tommy had salvaged from the bunker's armory. 6 hostiles, full tactical gear. Marcus checked his ammunition. 3 magazines left. After everything they'd survived, the escape from the detention facility, discovering Blackwood's estate, the horrors in the underground laboratory. It would end here in a firefight against their own government's cleanup crew. There, Tommy pointed to a drainage tunnel barely visible through the morning fog. 50 meters. We can make it if we move now. The sound of boots on gravel grew closer. Marcus recognized the deliberate spacing, the tactical precision. These weren't regular soldiers. They were the same Black Ops unit that had been hunting them since they'd first transmitted the evidence to Senator Rodriguez's secure server. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, package received. Going live in 30 minutes. Ah, Rodriguez got it, she breathed. The story breaks in half an hour. Then we just need to stay alive that long, Marcus replied, shouldering his rifle. The first shots came from the tree line, automatic fire that splintered the concrete around them. Marcus returned fire, his shots deliberate and measured, while Sarah laid down covering fire for Tommy's sprint toward the drainage tunnel. Go! Marcus shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm. They ran in a crouch, zigzagging across the open ground as bullets whined past their heads. Tommy reached the tunnel first, turning to provide cover as Marcus and Sarah dove for the opening. The tunnel was cramped, forcing them to crawl through knee-deep water that reeked of industrial runoff. Behind them, voices echoed. Their pursuers had found the entrance. There's light ahead, Tommy called back. The tunnel emerged into a storm drain that fed into the river. Sunlight streamed through the grate above, and Marcus could hear traffic. They were under the main highway, less than a mile from town. Sarah's phone rang. Senator Rodriguez. It's done. The senator's voice was urgent. The story's live on every major network. The president's calling for a full investigation. You did it. A splash behind them. Their hunters had entered the tunnel. We're not clear yet, Marcus said into the phone. Head for the federal building downtown. I've got FBI agents waiting. They'll escort you to protective custody until you can testify before Congress. Marcus looked at Sarah and Tommy, both of them exhausted, haunted by what they'd witnessed in Blackwood's laboratory. The floating bodies in preservation tanks, the surgical logs detailing decades of experiments on prisoners of war, the corporate contracts with defense contractors worth billions. Copy that, Marcus said. We're moving. They climbed through the storm grate into blinding daylight. The highway overpass provided cover as they oriented themselves toward downtown. In the distance, sirens wailed. Police, FBI, maybe military. The story breaking would trigger chaos across the intelligence community. A black SUV rounded the corner, tires squealing. Marcus raised his rifle, but the vehicle stopped and FBI agent Chen stepped out, badge visible. Senator Rodriguez sent us, Chen called. We're your escort. As they approached the SUV, Marcus noticed Sarah limping, favoring her left leg. Tommy's hands shook from exhaustion and adrenaline. They'd been running for 3 days straight, surviving on determination and the knowledge that they were the only ones who could expose the truth. It's over, Sarah said as they climbed into the vehicle. But Marcus knew better. As they drove toward the federal building, he watched the news coverage on Agent Chen's tablet. Already talking heads were questioning the authenticity of the evidence. Defense contractors' stock prices were plummeting, but their lawyers were mobilizing. Congressional allies were calling for closed-door hearings. The conspiracy they'd uncovered had roots throughout the military-industrial complex. Exposing it publicly was just the first step. Making it stick would require everything they had left. No, Marcus said, watching protesters gathering outside the federal building, some demanding justice, others calling them traitors. It's just beginning. The SUV pulled through the federal building's secured entrance. Inside, prosecutors waited with thick folders and recording equipment. Senator Rodriguez stood by the window, her face grim but determined. Marcus gripped the hard drives one last time before handing them over. 18 months of evidence, proof of crimes that went to the highest levels of government, justice for the prisoners who died in Blackwood's underground laboratory. He looked at Sarah and Tommy. 3 escaped prisoners who'd stumbled into the biggest military conspiracy in decades. They'd survived, and now they'd testify. The truth would come out, whatever the cost. The heavy doors closed behind them, sealing their fate and perhaps, finally, their safety.